Welcome back to The Deep Dive. Today we are exploring the life and work of a true titan of American literature, a man the New York Times once said was among the gods of America's literary Parnassus.
We are talking about Ralph Waldo Ellison, and we're going to be tracing the path that led him to write just one novel in his lifetime, but a novel that completely changed the landscape, Invisible Man.
And right there, that's the central paradox, isn't it? He's named after Ralph Waldo Emerson, the great philosopher of American individualism, of self-reliance, a man who was all about being seen.
The most visible intellectual, really. And yet, Ellison's entire career, his masterpiece, is about the exact opposite. It's about the experience of being unseen.
So if Emerson's whole thing was, forge your own path, be an individual.
All right.
Ellison comes along and asks, okay, but what happens when the world you're in refuses to even acknowledge that you exist, that the identity you forged is simply ignored?
And that's the tension. That's the engine of the whole thing. The promise of America, that Emersonian ideal crashing right into the reality of American prejudice. That's what fueled Invisible Man.
So that's our mission for this deep dive. We've got the biographies, the critical essays, and we want to figure out, how did a young man from Oklahoma, who really started out as a musician,
And a very serious one.
how did he become the author of a book that a 1965 poll would later call the most important novel since World War II?
It's a huge journey.
It's a massive journey. But before we even start, we have to talk about a little biographical quote that, just sets the stage perfectly.
Okay.
So the official record states he was born in Oklahoma City on March 1st, 1913. He died in 1994 at 81.
Right, but I saw in the sources there's a discrepancy there. He didn't always say 1913, did he?
No, he didn't. For most of his public life, he would give his birth year as 1914.
Well, who knows for sure, but the evidence for 1913 is solid. The census records, for example. But what's really fascinating is that biographers found a note from his mother where the year 1913 seems to have been erased and 1914 written over it.
Wow. So the author of a book about creating your own narrative was, in a small way, creating his own narrative from day one.
He was editing his own life story. It's a subtle act of self-invention, and it tells you everything about the kind of mind we're dealing with, someone who is deeply aware of how identity is constructed.
Okay, let's unpack that journey. Part 1. From Oklahoma to Alabama. This is the musician's path, but also his intellectual awakening.
It starts in Oklahoma from 1913 to 1933, and you really have to start with his father, Lewis Alfred Ellison.
He seems like the source of that initial literary ambition.
Absolutely. Lewis was a small business owner, a construction foreman, but he loved literature. He was the one who named his son after Emerson, and Ralph later found out his father had dreamed that he would grow up to be a poet.
But his father's influence was cut short, tragically.
Very short. He died in 1916 after a work accident. Ralph was only 3 years old.
And that left the family in a really precarious situation.
Completely. His mother, Ida Millsap, she remarried 3 times. There was no real stability. And that meant, for Ralph, childhood wasn't about leisure. It was about work. He had to contribute.
And the sources list the jobs he took on as a kid. It's quite a list.
It is. He was a busboy, a shoeshine boy, a hotel waiter, even a dentist assistant. And you have to think about what that teaches you.
The social dynamics.
Exactly. You're serving, you're watching, you're often being overlooked, you're learning about class and race from the ground up. It's an education you can't get in a classroom.
And running parallel to this life of hard labor was his first real passion.
Music. Music was his everything. It was his escape, his discipline. He got free lessons on trumpet and alto sax, and he got so good he became the school bandmaster at Douglas High School.
He even worked for a full year after graduating just to buy his own trumpet. That's dedication.
Total dedication. That was his path. That was his identity. Literature was his father's dream, but music was his reality.
And it's that trumpet that literally gets him out of Oklahoma.
It does. Which brings us to Tuskegee Institute from 1933 to 1936. This was the prestigious all-black university founded by Booker T. Washington. Ellison applies twice, and he finally gets in.
But not for his grades, right?
Not for his grades. He got in because the school orchestra desperately needed a trumpet player.
And the story of how he got there is just amazing. He didn't have money for a ticket.
No. He hopped freight trains,
Yeah.
hoboed his way from Oklahoma to Alabama to get an education. That image just says everything about his drive.
So he arrives at Tuskegee, this icon of black education and uplift, and what does he find?
He finds an environment that is, in its own way, just as rigidly structured as the white society he came from. The critic Hilton Als makes a really key point about this.
What's that?
Als notes that Ellison found Tuskegee to be incredibly class-conscious. It wasn't just about being black. It was about what kind of black person you were. Were you from the right family? Did you have the right connections?
So he was an outsider all over again.
Complete outsider. And Al's argues that this was crucial for his development as a writer. It sharpened his satirical lens.
Because he wasn't invested in playing the game.
He couldn't play it, so he just watched it. And he looked back at what Al's calls the sniveling ethos of the place with, both scorn and despair. That critical distance, that feeling of being an observer even among his own people. That's the voice of Invisible Man.
So he's there officially to study music under some pretty serious instructors.
Oh, yeah. William L. Dawson, the composer, was head of the department. He studied with Hazel Harrison, a renowned piano instructor. His musical education was top tier.
But he was leading this secret second life in the library.
A dual education, exactly. Music was his major, but literature became his obsession. And he said that reading T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland for the first time was just a massive transformative moment.
I can imagine. The fragmentation, the different voices in that poem. It must have felt like a blueprint for describing the modern world he was experiencing.
A key to unlocking it.
Yeah.
And then, in 1934, he gets a job as a desk clerk in the library, which is like giving him the keys to the kingdom.
So he's just devouring everything.
Everything. James Joyce, Gertrude Stein. He's mentored by the librarian, Walter Bowie Williams. But the real guide, the person who turned this passion into a possible vocation, was his English teacher, Morteza Drexel Sprague.
He dedicated his first essay collection, Shadow and Act, to Sprague, didn't he?
He did, because Sprague was the one who showed him, as Ellison put it, the possibilities of literature as a living art.
What did that mean, a living art?
It meant connecting the books to his own life. Sprague introduced him to Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment and Thomas Hardy's Jude the Obscure. And Ellison said he identified immediately with their brilliant, tortured anti-heroes.
It seems like a strange connection. A young black man in 1930s Alabama identifying with a 19th century Russian intellectual murderer.
But think about it. The narrator of Invisible Man is not a simple hero. He's hyper-intellectual, he's paranoid, he's isolated, he's constantly in his own head. That is a Dostoevskian character. Ellison wasn't looking for simple protest figures. He was looking for psychological complexity.
He was looking for a way to write from the inside out.
Exactly. Not just shouting from the outside. And this connects to another one of his passions, something that seems totally separate at first. Technology.
The audio equipment.
Yeah. As a kid, he would take radios apart and rebuild them, just fascinated with how they worked. As an adult, he built these incredibly elaborate, high-fidelity stereo systems. He even wrote about it for High Fidelity magazine in 1955.
So he's a tinkerer, an engineer.
He's an engineer of sound. And the scholar John S. Wright argues that this technical skill, this understanding of how to layer sounds, how to isolate frequencies, how to mix different inputs, directly informed how he constructed his novel.
So you're saying Invisible Man is structured like a piece of music being mixed on a soundboard?
In a way, yes. Think about the shifts in voice. You have the high-minded philosophical prose of the prologue, then you have Southern folk vernacular, then the rigid ideological language of the Brotherhood, then this beautiful jazz-like stream of consciousness.
He's layering all these different American voices.
He's layering the blues tradition, the folk tradition, right alongside the European high modernism of Eliot Joyce that he found in the library. It's a complex composition. And then, in 1936, he decides the composition needs a new venue. He leaves Tuskegee without a degree and heads for New York.
Which brings us to part 2. Harlem, the writers, and a profound political disillusionment.
He arrives on July 5, 1936. The original plan was to study sculpture, but he lands in Harlem at the YMCA on 135th Street, and he's immediately plugged into the center of Black American culture.
And he gets a huge introduction right away.
A game-changing introduction. He meets Langston Hughes,
Harlem's unofficial diplomat.
That's the perfect description. Hughes opens the door for him, introduces him to the entire Black literary world, which at that time was heavily influenced by Communist Party sympathies.
And that's how he meets the other major figure in his life at this point, Richard Wright.
Yes, a very, very important and very complicated relationship. Wright saw Ellison's talent immediately. Ellison sent him a book review, and Wright wrote back and said, "You need to be writing fiction."
And he did.
He did. His first published story, Jaime's Bull, comes directly from that experience, hoboing on the train to Tuskegee. Within a couple of years, he's publishing reviews, articles, short stories, over 20 pieces between 37 and 44. He's a professional writer.
But he's still thinking visually, too. He didn't just leave that sculpture idea behind.
No, his fascination with perception, with how we see things, was always there. And this comes through in his collaboration with the great photographer Gordon Parks in 1948.
This was the Harlem is Nowhere photo essay.
Right. It was about the Lafargue Clinic, which was the first racially integrated psychiatric clinic in Harlem. A really groundbreaking place.
And Ellison wasn't just writing captions for the photos.
Not at all. He wrote an essay called The Pictorial Problem, which is basically the theoretical manifesto for the project. He was thinking deeply about the psychological impact of images, about how photography could either reinforce stereotypes or break them. He was providing the intellectual framework for Parks's camera.
It just shows how he was constantly working on this problem of visibility from every angle, sound, text, image.
Every single angle. And that brings us to the political angle, which becomes so crucial. As we said, he was in Richard Wright's circle, publishing in left-wing magazines.
Wright was very openly a member of the Communist Party. Ellison's affiliation was quieter, but it was there.
It was definitely there. But then World War II happens, and everything changes.
The moment of disillusionment.
It's a profound break. Both he and Wright completely lose faith in the party. They felt that it had fundamentally betrayed African Americans.
What was the specific nature of that betrayal?
Well, the initial appeal of the party was its focus on Marxist class politics. The idea was that racial oppression was just a byproduct of capitalism, and a workers' revolution would solve it.
Oh, wait.
But during the war, the party lines shifted. The priority became supporting the Allied war effort, promoting national unity, so they replaced that revolutionary class politics with a much softer, gradual social reformism.
So they were essentially telling black members to put their most urgent struggles on the back burner for the sake of the war.
Exactly. And for Ellison and Wright, this was the ultimate betrayal. It was just one more institution that promised a kind of liberation, but in the end, refused to truly see their reality. The blindness was everywhere.
And that anger, that sense of being let down by the one ideology that promised a way out, that's what he pours into the novel.
All of it. And we have this incredible quote from a letter he wrote to Richard Wright on August 18th, 1945. It's the moment the mission for Invisible Man becomes crystal clear.
What does he say?
He writes, "Maybe we can't smash the atom, but we can, with a few well-chosen, well-written words, smash all that crummy filth to hell."
Smash all that crummy filth to hell. That's a declaration of war.
It's a declaration of literary war.
Yeah.
He's turning all of that political disappointment into artistic energy. Invisible Man is born right in the wake of that rupture. It's his answer to the party's failure.
And all this is happening while his personal life is also in flux. He had a first marriage that ended.
Yes, to an actress named Rose Poindexter. They married in 1938 and divorced in 1945. The biographies suggest it was a difficult relationship.
And then in 1946, he marries Fanny McConnell. And she seems to be the person who really makes the novel possible.
Absolutely essential.
Right.
Fanny was an incredible person in her own right. A writer, a theater founder, a brilliant intellectual, and she became his rock.
She supported them financially while he wrote.
She did. She took a job so he could write full-time for 7 years. But it was more than that. She was his first reader, his editor. She typed his longhand manuscripts. She was an active collaborator in the creation of this masterpiece.
So while he was preparing to smash all that crummy filth, she was building the foundation that let him do it.
A true partnership. And it's incredible to remember that even in the middle of all this, in 1946, he's still composing music. The sources say he wrote lyrics and music for at least 2 songs. The musician was always there, right alongside the writer.
And in 1952, those 2 voices, along with the voice of the political disillusioned, all come together. Which brings us to part 3, the achievement of invisibility.
Yes. The book is finally published. It's a novel told by an unnamed African-American narrator, charting his journey from the South to Harlem and ultimately underground.
And the central concept, that idea of invisibility, he defines it right up front.
He does. The narrator explains he's not a ghost or a spirit. He's invisible in a figurative sense because people refuse to see him.
So it's a condition imposed on him by society.
It's a social and moral failure of the world around him. And that refusal to see him forces him into this state of deep dissociation, this search for an identity that the world won't grant him.
And he's exploring all the different flavors of American racism, the kind in the South versus the kind in the North.
They're very different. The Southern racism is paternalistic, it's overt. The Northern racism is more ideological, more organizational. But the result is the same, invisibility.
And the novel ends with him literally living underground in a forgotten basement room in New York City.
Right, and this is where that passion for technology comes back in a huge way.
The light bulbs.
The 1,369 light bulbs that he has rigged up to illuminate his hole stealing power from the electric company. And he's got his custom-built hi-fi stereo system down there.
So he's surrounded himself with light, with technology, in order to be seen, but he's in a place where no one can see him.
It's a perfect metaphor. He's trying to achieve total clarity, to understand the chaos of the world by listening to it on his stereo, by illuminating it with all this light. But he has to withdraw from that world completely to do it. He's taking it all apart to see how it works, just like those radios he built as a kid.
And the narrator himself was such a different kind of character for that time.
A radical departure. This was not the kind of protagonist you saw in a lot of protest novels.
Yeah.
He's educated, he's articulate, he's deeply self-aware, almost dispassionate at times. His anger is intellectual. It's filtered through all that modernism he read at Tuskegee.
The book also didn't pull any punches on controversial topics.
Not at all. It deals with incest, and most daringly for 1952, it gives an insider's critique of the Communist Party, which she calls the Brotherhood, in the novel. To do that at the height of the McCarthy era was incredibly brave.
And the reception was just immediate.
It was explosive. In 1953, it wins the U.S. National Book Award for fiction. And that was it. That was his ticket. He was no longer an outsider. He was now part of the literary establishment.
But true to form, he was still his own harshest critic.
Oh, absolutely. He was a perfectionist to the core. And even when he's accepting this huge honor, he says he felt he had only made an attempt at a major novel and that he was still unsatisfied with it.
An attempt? That's mind-boggling.
For him, the artistic standard was just impossibly high. But the world disagreed. And the biggest confirmation of its importance came later.
The 1965 Book Week poll.
Yes. 200 critics, authors, and editors were asked to name the most important novel written since World War II. And they chose Invisible Man.
Over everything else. Over Mailer, over Salinger, over Bellow. What made it resonate so profoundly, especially in the context of 1965 and the civil rights movement?
I think it's because it offered complexity in a time of slogans. It refused easy answers. It argued that the Black experience wasn't one single thing, it was a multitude of things. It challenged the simple narrative of progress by showing the deep psychological cost of the struggle. It was a novel about the failure of all ideologies, and that spoke to a country that was grappling with its own identity.
So it became more than just a great novel about the Black experience. It became a great American novel, period.
A foundational American novel. And Ellison used the visibility that came with that fame. After his bad experience with the Communist Party, he became a fierce advocate for art as a moral instrument, as the only thing that could truly cut through the blindness of society.
And that new role as a public intellectual defines the next phase of his life, which takes us to part 4, scholar, teacher, and the immense weight of the second novel.
After the success, he moves into the world of academia. He teaches at Bard, at Rutgers, at Yale. He publishes his first collection of essays, Shadow and Act, in 1964.
And he dedicates it to Morteza Sprague, his old English teacher from Tuskegee.
Bringing it full circle. And by 1970, he has a permanent, prestigious post at NYU as the Albert Schweitzer Professor of Humanities, where he stayed for a decade. He was a major intellectual figure.
And he was being consulted in some really unexpected places. I was fascinated by the detail about the Hudson Institute.
Isn't that incredible? In 1962, Herman Kahn, the futurist, recruits him as a consultant for a defense research think tank.
What on earth did a defense think tank want with Ralph Ellison?
They were trying to think bigger. They realized that to understand national security and strategy, you couldn't just look at weapon systems. You had to understand the national character, the culture, the history. And they believed the author of Invisible Man had unique insights into the soul of America.
That's a level of respect for a novelist that you just don't see anymore.
Almost never. At the same time, he's traveling, he's lecturing in Europe. He settles in Rome for a while and becomes good friends with the writer Robert Penn Warren. He was always in conversation with the great minds of his time.
And his writing continued to focus on his two great loves.
The Black experience and jazz music. His essays on jazz are just brilliant. But the real window into his thinking during these years comes from his correspondence with the writer Albert Murray.
Which was published as Trading Twelves.
Yes. And reading those letters, it's like listening in on one of the great conversations of the 20th century. They're debating the civil rights movement, they're analyzing Duke Ellington, they are arguing about the very language we should use to describe the American experience. It's an intellectual feast.
But hanging over all of this, the teaching, the essays, the awards, is this giant question mark.
The second novel.
The second novel, and the terrible event that happened in 1967.
It's a true literary tragedy. He had a summer home in Plainfield, Massachusetts, and there was a massive house fire. And in that fire, Ellison said, More than 300 pages of his manuscript for the second novel were destroyed.
I can't even imagine. For a perfectionist like him, someone who was already unsatisfied with his masterpiece, to lose that much work.
It had to have been paralyzing, devastating. It wasn't just the pages, it was the momentum, the confidence.
And yet, he kept working on it.
For the rest of his life. For nearly 3 more decades. He ended up writing over 2,000 pages for this book.
2,000 pages.
But he never finished it. He never got it to a place where he felt it was ready for the world. He died of pancreatic cancer in 1994, with the novel still incomplete. It was the great unfinished project of his life.
So for 42 years after Invisible Man was published, he was wrestling with its shadow.
He was. And thankfully, we did eventually get to see the results of that struggle. His literary executor, John F. Callahan, began to piece it all together.
So we got some posthumous collections?
Yes, a book of short stories called Flying Home came out in 1996. Then in 1999, Callahan published Juneteenth, which was a 368-page condensation of that massive 2,000-page manuscript.
A sort of edited, curated version of the unfinished work?
Exactly. But then, in 2010, the full thing was published as 3 days before the shooting, and that includes all the pages, all the drafts, all the fragments. It lets you see the scale of his ambition, but also the scale of his struggle.
Even with that struggle, his place in history was secure. The awards he received are just staggering.
Oh, the recognition was immense. He got the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 1969, the National Medal of Arts in 1985. He was made a Chevalier of the Ordre des Arts et des Lettres by France.
He got an honorary doctorate from Harvard. He was the first African-American admitted to the Century Association. It's an incredible list.
And he's been memorialized in the places that shaped him. There's the Ralph Waldo Ellison Library in his hometown of Oklahoma City.
And a beautiful memorial in Harlem, near where he lived for decades.
Yes, on 150th and Riverside Drive. It's a park dedicated to him, and it has this huge 15-foot bronze slab with a cutout of a human figure, a literal invisible man etched into the landscape of Harlem.
So to bring this all together, it feels like his entire life was a funnel. All these early experiences, the hard labor as a kid, the outsider status at Tuskegee, the discovery of modernism, the betrayal by the communists.
And you have to include the partnership with Fannie McConnell, who gave him the stability to even write the book. All of those things, all those different layers of sound, as we said, had to be there to create the one singular voice of Invisible Man.
And the central tension of his life seems to be right there in his most famous idea, the tension between visibility and invisibility.
Absolutely. Here's a man who receives the highest honors a country can bestow: presidential medals, academic chairs, think tank consultancies. He is an incredibly visible public figure.
And his entire life's work, the thing that made him famous, is about the pain of being unseen. And his own private life was dominated by this immense invisible struggle to finish that second book.
He was the most famous chronicler of invisibility in the world. His whole life embodied that paradox. A man of so many talents: musician, technician, sculptor, writer, who became famous for one single towering achievement.
Which leaves us with a final thought for you, our listeners. Ellison wrestled his whole life with the impossibility of having his full, complex self seen by the public. He was always more than just the author of Invisible Man. So in our world today, a world that's just saturated with information, where we are constantly performing our identities on social media, does that concept of invisibility still resonate? The idea of being known for one thing, but having your true, complicated self overlooked.
And maybe to add to that, if Ellison's life shows us that achieving real depth requires decades of labor, of struggle, and even a kind of retreat from the world, how does that challenge how we think about our own lives today, when we're always expected to be visible, to be projecting, to be online?
Is it possible that true self-knowledge, the kind Ellison was searching for, can only really happen when we allow parts of ourselves to remain invisible?
That's the question he leaves us with.
A perfect place to end. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the life of Ralph Ellison.
My pleasure.